Hi everybody, so my name's Annabelle Conti, and as Odessa just said, I'm going to be talking about a story to heal the climate. I'm lucky. I was born into a long line of seafarers. My great-great-grandfather sailed around Cape Horn 56 times, and my dad has sailed around the world 3 times. My sailing career started early. When I was 3, we left California to sail across the Pacific to Australia on an adventure that would last 2.5 years. During this trip, we lived on a 47-foot catamaran named Ocealis. Unfortunately, I shared a cabin with my brother. Sometimes we got fed up with each other, and I actually eventually taught him a lesson by throwing his Game Boy into the toilet. Occasionally, though, we did get along, and we had some great times together. One of the highlights of this trip was our stop in Vanuatu, when we climbed to the top of an active volcano. Yes, I know this may sound like irresponsible parenting, especially since I was 5, but it actually turned out to be one of the best memories in our family, and it's still a running joke. My brother's nickname is Volcano because he was terrified of the whole experience. Also in Vanuatu, I got to fulfill every child's dream of holding as many puppies as could fit in my arms. Of course, my parents were strongly against having flea-infested puppies in the boat, so that dream didn't really last too long. And whenever we were anchored in front of all these different islands, we were frequently invited to join in on the local activities. And one that we still talk about today is when my parents went to catch a coconut crab. So, unfortunately for coconut crabs, they're delicious. And to protect themselves from predators like my hungry parents, they have rock-solid shells and massive pincers that can easily take a chunk out of you. And even though we lived on a boat and spent the majority of our time on the water, we also got to spend plenty of time on shore. In fact, we even bought an old car and drove around New Zealand for a month, so we got to see the whole country from the land. So, although this was just a generally amazing and beautiful experience, one of the biggest impacts this trip has had on my life is the perspective it's given me on climate change. It's driving me crazy that not enough is being done to fix the climate crisis. Based on my personal experiences and what I learned from meeting all these different people around the world, this crisis is not only about what is going to happen in the future, it's about what's happening right now in communities all over the globe. This is not a tomorrow problem, this is a today crisis. I even remember seeing with my own eyes how climate change has already impacted the communities and habitats that we visited, like the Queensland flood in 2009. And one of the most threatening effects of climate change is extreme weather events like this. For example, hurricanes and cyclones are getting more frequent, more violent, and less predictable. Since 1980, hurricanes have caused almost $1 trillion worth of damage in the US alone. Hurricanes are dangerous, and they're responsible for more deaths than any other weather disaster. Warmer water temperatures mean that more heat energy is available, and there's a higher potential for cyclonic storms to develop. So, as humans continue to release planet-warming greenhouse gases, the likelihood of cyclone activity increases. In the past, we've been able to know what specific months are dangerous and where the hurricanes are predicted to go. But with the changes in the climate, the hurricane season is becoming longer and less predictable. We can no longer know for sure when and where we will be safe. This increases the risk for sailors, and it'll change the way people sail or even just travel by water. And it's not just people who sail. Those who live near a coast are also becoming more and more vulnerable. So it's not just the coastal areas that are affected by climate change. Here in California and in places like Australia and Portugal, wildfires are posing an increasing risk. Roughly up to 820 million hectares of land burn each year. Climate change causes forest fuels, which is organic matter that burns and spreads wildfire, to be drier. This has doubled the amount of large fires between 1984 and 2015 in the western United States. Changes in the climate with warmer, drier conditions and longer drought seasons mean even more wildfire risk. For a lot of the US West, projections show that an annual 1 degree Celsius temperature increase will elevate the burned area as much as 600% a year. My dad and I are both volunteer firefighters, and these projections are pretty scary to face up to. So, Extreme weather, it's easy to see, it makes the news, and it's not that hard to see the connection between weather and climate change. But there's a lot going on that's harder to see. In the ocean lives the smallest photosynthetic organism on Earth, called Prochlorococcus. It produces roughly 20% of the oxygen in our entire biosphere. Climate change is a big issue for this tiny algae, though. If key factors that drive marine ecosystems are altered, the surface of the water becomes nutrient-starved, as the nutrients are pushed into deeper levels of the ocean. The plankton and bacteria that produces oxygen will essentially starve, meaning eventually we suffocate. This is not an exaggeration. The ocean produces 50 to 80% of our oxygen. If that system breaks down, all that will be left is lichens and cockroaches. The ocean is also suffering in other ways. Corals form one of the most biodiverse ecosystems, and they're also among the most rapidly declining species groups. Coral bleaching and ocean acidification is a widespread consequence of climate change. When the water temperature or the pollution levels rise too high, the coral gets stressed and drives out the symbiotic algae living inside it. This algae, called zooxanthellae, is what keeps the coral alive. If the water temperatures or pollution levels do not go back to normal, the coral will never get the algae back and it'll die. The death of coral reefs leads directly to a decrease in marine life. And this is a problem for the island communities that depend on coral reefs for sustenance. Coral also provides a barrier between islands and extreme weather events like tsunamis and hurricanes. Without coral reefs, islands of any size lose protection they vitally need. On our boat trip, we were in such remote places that we didn't really see much coral bleaching. But small island nations that rely on tourism are suffering economically as well. Coral reefs and the vibrant ecosystems they support are a main attraction of these islands, and the death of a reef can mean disaster for an island community. Sea level rise is another one of the most widely talked about effects of climate change. And although it may not seem like such a big threat or like it's not going to happen for a long time, this is a real problem today. So what causes sea levels to rise in the first place? It's mostly generated by the melting of glaciers and ice sheets and thermal expansion of the water as it warms. Knowing that 40% of the world's population, which is about 3 billion people, live within 100 kilometers of the coast, we should be concerned. Sea level rise is threatening to inundate small island nations and many coastal regions by the end of the century. In fact, many people have already been displaced. Tonga's prime minister said back in 2008, which is 12 years ago, that the prospect of displaced peoples in island states is no longer a prospect, but a reality, with the relocations of community due to sea level rise already taking place. So you may see a theme developing here. The ocean is facing a great risk from global warming, and since we rely on the ocean in so many ways, we're facing that same risk. Okay, so is anybody listening happy to know that this is our future? Of course not, and that's exactly my point here today. If every time we talk about the climate, the bleaching of coral reefs, or the increasing sea level rising, we focus only on the negative, people are going to have a hard time taking positive action. People will just give up, ignore, or disbelieve. I think it's essential to environmental efforts around the world and to the life of our planet to change the doom and gloom narrative of climate change into a positive one. Younger generations are especially at risk of losing hope if they believe their futures are so grim and that it's set in stone. When they're repeatedly told, the boomers messed up the world irreversibly and now you guys have to live with that, it's going to be hard for them to find the motivation to do much about it. What we really need is a positive narrative that is honest about the situation, but offers hope in a way forward. We could start with the little kids, the knee biters. By introducing topics around climate change early, it becomes something exciting to talk about, a challenge and not a threat. If we can start the conversation about climate change early in school curriculums, it'll become part of every child's worldview. something they will be comfortable talking about and exploring. In fact, this is already happening. The next generation science standards are new standards adopted by the state of California in 2013, where climate change is one of the core topics for middle and high school students. UNESCO has adopted this tactic as well and emphasizes its importance. According to UNESCO, education, especially when focused on children and young people, is a key factor in helping to curb climate change. It encourages changes in people's attitudes and behavior, and it helps them to adapt to climate change-related trends. Education is essentially a way to reach a huge audience and to shape their thinking for the rest of their lives. We could create an army of future climate defenders this way. Technology offers some promising advances for the climate too. For instance, cows are really bad. 15% of GHGs are emitted by livestock, and it takes 1,800 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef. But right now, dozens of high-tech companies are working on synthetic and plant-based meats. The cost is going down and the taste is getting better. In 10 years, there will be no reason to eat real meat anymore. Renewable energy is also taking off. It's poised to take over coal as the top global power producer of energy in the next 5 years. This is great news. And there's so much more cool work to be done in renewable energy that we're just starting to explore. So understanding climate change is a key to solving it. Today, we know more about the planet and the environment than ever before. Citizen scientists from Sri Lanka to the Amazon are using mobile apps to report environmental crimes. Cameras with AI are being deployed that can recognize different species in the field and can alert scientists about rare species, or even prevent human-animal habitat conflict. And small, inexpensive sensors are being deployed all over the world, giving us more data about what's actually happening on the planet than ever before. So, to fix the climate crisis, we need to change our behavior. Sustainable lifestyles are becoming more and more popular. It's cool now to support the circular economy. I can't remember the last time I went shopping with my friends in a store that wasn't secondhand. And now there's even apps, online platforms, and social media that support and encourage this kind of shopping. Governments are getting in on the action too. Countries like China, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and more have committed to being carbon neutral by 2050, and the US just rejoined the Paris Agreement. Norway, for example, is becoming a pioneer in green energy. Per capita, Norway has the most electric car drivers and owners in the world. And many governments are also racing to increase the number of marine protected areas, which have been shown to be one of the most powerful ways to help the ocean heal itself. So look, my point is that, of course, we need to understand the nature of the problems and challenges we face from climate change. But instead of focusing on how bad things are going to be and just stopping there, we need to put our energy, focus, and creativity into solving these problems. The best way to do that, the best way to engage and recruit the number of people we need, is with a positive narrative that celebrates what we might achieve and that inspires people to put their best into overcoming these problems. If we teach ourselves and our future children how to be champions rather than victims of the climate crisis, then we may actually stand a chance of conquering it. Thank you.